Welcome to the Phil and H Travel Podcast. Is it worth it? If you're planning a trip and want the honest, is it worth it verdict before you book, follow the show on Spotify or Apple.
Absolutely. Because today, well, we have a deep dive that is going to completely break your brain visually.
It really is. I mean, usually when you look at a travel brochure for a beach escape, you're relying on this very specific visual shorthand, right?
Yeah, that classic aesthetic.
Right. You see these photos of pristine, powdery white sand. You see incredibly clear turquoise waters that are just gently lapping at the shore.
Any exotic flowers.
Yes. Brilliant exotic flowers blooming everywhere. The kind that look like they belong in a botanical conservatory.
Yeah.
And your brain just immediately categorizes it.
It does. You instantly think Caribbean. Or maybe you think of the Indian Ocean, like the Maldives or somewhere deep in the South Pacific.
Exactly.
We've been completely conditioned by decades of travel marketing to, associate that specific color palette with a warm tropical reality.
Right. Our minds just say, okay, this is warm, it's far away, and above all, it's predictable. You go there to completely escape the elements.
Not to battle them.
Exactly, not to battle them. But then you zoom out on the map
Right.
for this specific destination we're looking at today, and that mental shortcut just entirely breaks down.
Shatters.
Yeah, because we are looking at a cluster of islands that photograph exactly like the Bahamas, but they are, well, honestly, they're just 28 miles off the coast of Cornwall, England.
Which is just, it's the absolute definition of a geographic illusion. We're talking about the Isles of Scilly.
The Isles of Scilly.
Right. And that 28-mile distance is the source of so much misunderstanding. It leads to so many busted budgets and, frankly, ruined holidays.
Oh, completely.
Because when you see those bright photos, you don't think about the North Atlantic. You don't think about the Gulf Stream violently colliding with British weather systems. You just think, I didn't know the UK had a tropical paradise.
And that illusion is exactly why we are doing this deep dive.
Yeah.
Because the source material we're working from today is not some glossy promotional travel brochure.
Far from it.
Yeah. We're looking at a briefing titled Isles of Scilly Travel Guide, the honest 2026-27 verdict. And reading through this research, it really feels like a hard-hitting travel audit.
It really does. It's almost ruthlessly honest about what it actually takes to holiday there.
It's phenomenal due diligence. So our mission today is to take that audit and completely deconstruct the myth that the Isles of Scilly are just some, easy, cheap domestic beach hack.
Right, or like a simple weekend add-on for international tourists visiting London.
Exactly. Our goal is to conduct serious, rigorous reality testing for you, the listener. We're going to explore the high-friction, deeply weather-dependent realities of these islands so you know exactly what you're buying.
Because a lot of people are buying a pure fantasy, and they end up paying a massive premium for a very cold reality check.
You really do.
Yeah.
And this destination is being heavily audited right now because, 2026 and 2027 are transitional years.
Yeah, massive changes are happening. The transport infrastructure connecting the islands to the mainland is totally in flux.
And capacity is capped.
Right, capacity is severely capped. Plus, the prices reflect a microeconomy that behaves way more like a remote oceanic outpost than, a county in England.
So the core reality we have to establish right out of the gate is that the Isles of Scilly are low capacity and extremely high friction.
High friction, which is so counterintuitive to how we normally think about domestic travel.
Completely. And I want to jump straight into that friction.
Right.
Because our source makes it abundantly clear that getting there is like half the battle.
Oh, at least half.
And a terrifying amount of the budget. So to just paint the picture for you, you're on the mainland. You're in the extreme southwest of England.
Right down with the tip.
Right. And the Isles of Scilly Travel Group controls the main arteries. If you want to fly, you have the Skybus. These are these small fixed-wing aircraft.
Basically a bus with wings.
Yeah, exactly. You can fly from Land's End up to 7 times daily. And that hop is incredibly short, like 15 minutes in the air.
Super fast. But you can also fly from Cornwall Airport, New Clay, also up to 7 times daily. And that's actually crucial because that specific route operates year-round, which some of the seasonal options don't do.
Well, that's a good point.
Yeah. And then you have Exeter, which is a bit further up the peninsula, offering 2 daily flights. So aviation gives you options. And this is a massive, but they are highly susceptible to low cloud cover and wind.
But aviation isn't even the classic route, is it? Like the traditional, almost rite of passage route is by sea.
The famous ferry.
Right, the Scillonian IV ferry.
Yeah.
This is a passenger ship running from Penzance Harbor on the mainland directly over to St. Mary's Harbor on the islands. It runs from March to November.
But the schedule,
The schedule, that's the thing that jumped out at me in the audit. It is shockingly rigid.
it really is.
You have a 9:00 a.m. departure from Penzance, which gets you to the islands right around noon. And then the return ship leaves St. Mary's at 5:00 p.m. and gets you back to Penzance around 7:00 p.m.
And that specific schedule establishes a rhythm that dictates the entire tempo of your holiday. I mean, it is a full travel day rhythm.
You can't just pop over for the afternoon.
No, absolutely not. If you take that ferry, your entire day is built completely around its mechanics.
Honestly, looking at that 9:00 a.m. to 5:00 p.m. window, it gave me intense flashbacks to, like, a school field trip.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
You know that feeling, right?
Right.
You arrive at the museum, and the teacher tells you that you have exactly 4.5 hours to look around.
And if you're not back on the bus at exactly 4:45, you are getting left behind.
Exactly. You are strictly on their clock. It doesn't feel like the relaxing freedom of a beach vacation at all. It feels like an organized deployment.
The school field trip anxiety is a very real psychological factor here. You are constantly checking your watch.
Right.
And if you want to bypass that ticking clock, you basically have to buy your way out of it by moving to the premium option, which is Penzance helicopters.
Which, I mean, sounds incredibly glamorous. Oh, I'll just take the helicopter.
It is glamorous, but it comes with a steep toll. They fly from a dedicated heliport in Penzance directly to either St. Mary's or Tresco.
Flight is short, right?
Yeah, only 15 to 20 minutes. But you are strictly limited to 20 kilograms of luggage.
Which is not a lot for a family trip.
Not at all. But the headline costs are what really catch people completely off guard. If we convert the 2026 day trip fares to US dollars, you are looking at roughly $273 for a standard fare.
273.
Right. If you book last minute, maybe because the ferry just looks too rough that morning, it's $218. Or if you just want a scenic joyride on the day, it's $204.
Wow.
And remember, that is per person.
Wait, per person. So if
Yeah.
you're a family of 4 trying to bypass that field trip ferry schedule, you're suddenly dropping like $1,000 just across 28 miles of water.
Easily $1,000.
That is staggering.
Yeah.
And all of this is happening against the backdrop of a major infrastructure upgrade, right?
Yes, a huge one.
Because our briefing notes that the current ferry, the Scillonian IV, is going to be replaced. There's a new vessel, the Scillonian IV, arriving in March 2027.
Right. It's going to carry 600 passengers, and the marketing explicitly promises smoother sailing.
And we really need to pause on those words, smoother sailing.
Yeah, because in the context of the Isles of Scilly, that is not just marketing fluff. It is a critical operational upgrade.
Because the current crossing is rough.
A current Scillonian crossing is legendary in the UK for rough waters. That stretch of ocean between Land's End and the islands is literally where the Atlantic meets the English Channel.
It's a churning washing machine.
Exactly. Severe seasickness is practically woven into the cultural memory of getting to these islands. People joke about it, but honestly, when you are 3 hours into a rolling swell, it completely alters how you experience your first day.
Because you arrive completely exhausted.
Exhausted and severely nauseous.
Which brings us to a psychological phenomenon the audit calls the only 28 miles access trap. And this absolutely blew my mind because it perfectly explains why smart travelers make such terrible logistical mistakes here.
It really is the biggest trap.
The brief points out that the real friction of this trip isn't actually on the islands themselves. The friction is just trying to get to the mainland departure points like Penzance or Newquay, Land's End, Exeter at the exact right time.
This is where the geography of the UK really trips people up, especially international visitors.
Right, because if you look at a map, Cornwall is that long peninsula sticking out of the bottom left of England.
And it is beautiful, but it is notoriously slow to navigate. You've got single-lane roads, heavy holiday traffic, and a railway line that is incredibly susceptible to delays.
So the mental trap is that travelers look at that 28-mile distance to the islands, and they map mainland reliability onto it.
Exactly. We think of 28 miles as a 30-minute drive down an interstate. It's nothing.
Oh, it's just off the coast.
Right. Because there's no passport control, there's no international border, and they're spending British pounds. So they think, it's domestic travel, I'll just pop over.
They assume it runs like a commuter train.
They absolutely do. They'll book a train from London that arrives in Penzance at, say, 8:40 a.m., assuming they can just casually stroll over to the ferry terminal for the 9:40 a.m. departure.
But the lived reality is that operationally, You are dealing with all the constraints of a remote oceanic expedition.
Yes.
If that train from London is delayed by 45 minutes, which is incredibly common, the ferry does not wait for you.
No. The tide dictates when that ship leaves, not the railway schedule.
And the financial penalty for that misunderstanding is brutal. If you miss that connection, the source explicitly warns that it can instantly add $150 to $500 in unexpected costs to your trip.
Instantly?
Wait, explain that. How does missing a boat instantly cost you $500?
Because you are suddenly stranded at the absolute end of the UK mainland during peak holiday season.
Oh.
You have to pay rebooking fees for the ferry or flight if there's even space available. You have to pay for emergency, last-minute overnight hotel accommodation in Penzance or Newquay.
Which won't be cheap.
Exactly. And you might have to pay for expensive taxis to shuttle between the train station, a hotel, and then the airport if you decide to try flying the next day instead. The meter starts running the second you miss that connection.
That is genuinely terrifying. Treating this like a spontaneous add-on to a Cornwall road trip really is a recipe for a ruined holiday.
You cannot have zero slack in your itinerary. If you are arriving on the mainland on the exact same day you plan to cross to the islands, you are playing Russian roulette with your vacation budget.
Which is why the briefing offers a very firm, basically non-negotiable fix for this trap. You must overnight in Penzance or near your chosen airport the night before your island crossing.
You have to build in a firewall of time.
A firewall of time. Or choose flights much later in the day that have hours of slack built in. The author of this audit bluntly advises that if you cannot tolerate a heavy, potentially stressful travel day before the holiday properly begins, you should skip the Isles of Scilly entirely.
I love that level of honesty. Just skip it.
Skip it? It's great. You have to leave your mainland logic behind the moment you commit to this trip. But here's the thing. That loss of control doesn't end once you finally step off the boat onto the islands.
Oh, not at all. In fact, it intensifies.
It really does. And that leads directly into the second massive reality check in our source material, which is the dictatorship of the weather.
We have to talk about the weather because, again, we are fighting that visual illusion we talked about earlier.
Exactly. You see those photos of the clear turquoise water, the bright white sand, and your mainland brain says, great, pack a swimsuit, pack a towel, let's go lay on the beach.
But the briefing is incredibly careful with its wording here. It says the islands have a mild maritime climate, and we really need to dissect that phrase.
Because mild absolutely does not mean predictable.
That is the single most important distinction for anyone planning this trip. In meteorological terms, mild just means the temperature curve is flattened out.
Right.
It rarely reaches the freezing extremes of winter, and it rarely hits the boiling heat waves of summer. The ocean acts as this giant thermal blanket.
The thermal blanket can still be wet, right?
It can be wet, it can be foggy, and it can be incredibly windy.
The official Visit Isles of Scilly temperatures in the briefing really tell the unvarnished story here. I mean, listen to these numbers. In spring, the average temperatures are 48 to 57 degrees Fahrenheit.
Which is brisk.
Very brisk. And summer, the absolute peak time to visit is only 59 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit.
That's the peak.
That's the peak. Autumn drops back down to 52 to 63 degrees, and winter sits around 45 to 54 degrees.
So even in the absolute peak of August, at 70 degrees Fahrenheit, you are not baking in the tropics. You are experiencing a pleasant, fresh, British summer day.
Right. It is comfortable, but it's not, sweat through your shirt and eat a frozen margarita hot.
Not at all.
I feel like 70 degrees is the temperature where you're sitting on the beach, and if the sun goes behind a cloud for more than 3 minutes, you're immediately reaching for a fleece pullover.
Especially with the wind. The source warns that stronger winter winds and occasional stormy weather are just part of the package year-round.
And because of this, the brief argues that your timing, like which season you choose, is the single most important decision you'll make.
Let's break those seasons down because the experience changes drastically depending on the month you choose.
Okay, let's start with the shoulder season. That runs from March to May.
Right. And because of that maritime effect we talked about, spring actually arrives on the Isles of Scilly much earlier than on much of the British mainland.
The frost is rare, the flowers start blooming early, and the light is supposed to be fantastic.
It is. The brief says this is prime time for a very specific type of traveler: walkers, bird watchers, and garden enthusiasts.
They highlight two major events in spring. There's Walk Scilly in April, and the World Pilot Gig Championships in May.
The gig championships are huge.
I actually had to look this up because it sounded so specific. A pilot gig is this massive 32-foot traditional wooden rowing boat.
Yeah, they're incredible pieces of history.
Historically, they were used to race out to incoming ships in the Atlantic to guide them safely through the treacherous reefs. The first gig to reach the ship got the job and the money.
It was literally a race for survival and income.
Exactly. And now it's this massive international racing sport, and the World Championships absolutely take over the islands in May.
It's an incredible cultural event, but it highlights the major downside of spring travel mentioned in the audit.
What's that?
Well, if you're expecting warm, swimming, long, lazy beach days, or relying purely on light summer clothing, spring will really disappoint you.
Oh, sure.
Furthermore, because events like the Gig Championships draw thousands of rowers and spectators, the accommodation and transport capacity, which is already strictly limited, is pushed to the absolute breaking point.
Finding a bed during gig weekend is notoriously difficult.
It's nearly impossible unless you book a year out.
Right, which naturally pushes most people into the peak season, June through August. The brief calls this peak convenience, but also peak pressure.
It's the warmest weather, you get the longest daylight hours, you can actually enjoy outdoor dining in the evenings without freezing, and all the seasonal markets and cafes are fully open.
If you want to do kayaking or sailing, wild swimming, snorkeling, this is obviously the most appealing window.
But the brief points at a massive paradox here. Because it's the best time to go, it is the busiest time to go. And the islands were not built for volume.
Hugh, which is the main settlement on St. Mary's, becomes the unavoidable practical hub for everyone.
It gets packed.
The audit says places like St. Mary's, Carataque, Porthcressa Beach, Town Beach, Hugh Street, and the Garrison feel noticeably more active. You are constantly brushing shoulders with day trippers.
And the real bottleneck happens because everyone targets the exact same day trips at the exact same time.
Because of the ferry schedule.
Yes. The ferry arrives at noon, and suddenly hundreds of people all want to go to Tresco's Abbey Garden or New Grimsby or Carnear or Ruin Beach. These beautiful, delicate locations suddenly experience a massive surge of foot traffic.
It's the classic tourism trap. We all want the deserted island experience, but we all show up at 1:00 p.m. on a Tuesday in August.
Exactly. The brief notes that travelers also flock to St. Martin's because it has the clearest water and the best beaches.
And while the smaller islands, like Bryher and St. Agnes, still maintain a smaller feel, there is a catch.
Always a catch.
The audit emphasizes that boat departures and lunch reservations suddenly become a competitive sport in August. You cannot just wing it. If you want a pub lunch on Bryher in August, you better have a reservation, or you are eating a squashed granola bar from your backpack.
Which leads to a really fascinating contrarian take in this briefing. The author actually pushes back hard on the idea that the Isles of Scilly are best experienced in August.
Oh, I found that so compelling.
Yeah.
They state that August is only the best month if you have a massive budget to secure the best accommodation and you have a high tolerance for crowding and queuing.
Right. Instead, they argue that September is the ultimate adult compromise.
Why September specifically?
It really comes down to economics and experience. The official weather data shows that September often feels like a direct extension of summer. The ocean has spent all summer absorbing heat, so the water is actually at its warmest.
Though warm is highly relative here, obviously.
Highly relative. But crucially, the school holidays are over. The autumn brings a much, much quieter atmosphere.
The brief says, for couples, walkers, and photographers, September into early October offers significantly better value. You get the usable sea temperatures for the hardy swimmers, you get the migrating birds returning, and most importantly, the islands finally regain their breathing room.
The restaurants have tables again, the boatmen aren't constantly rushing you.
But there's a risk with autumn, right?
Always. The risk with autumn is that the Atlantic winds can really pick up. And those transport services, the ferries and the flights, are much less forgiving of high winds than they are in peak summer.
And the transition from autumn into winter is sharp. The brief says if you try to visit between October and February, you are entering what it strictly labels specialist territory.
Specialist territory. That sounds like code for bring waterproof everything and expect every single pub to be closed.
It is exactly that. While the winter is milder than mainland Britain-like, you rarely see snow. It is exceptionally wet, intensely windy, and profoundly quiet.
Many of the hotels, cafes, and off-island attractions simply shut down for maintenance and rest. It works if you are a rider seeking absolute solitude, or if you're someone who deeply understands the harsh reality of winter island travel.
But for a first-timer expecting the full 5-island experience, it is terrible value.
Terrible value.
And speaking of those daily boats and island hopping, we have to talk about safety and the elements, because it's not just the rain and wind you have to worry about.
No, the audit highlights a hidden danger: UV risk.
Yeah, they cite a local business, Sibley's, which issues a stern warning that high-factor sun protection is essential, which sounds weird for a place that maxes out at 70 degrees.
It's a classic maritime trap. The air clarity on the islands is exceptional. I mean, there is virtually no pollution. That means the UV index is significantly higher than on the mainland.
Right.
But because the sea breeze is constantly blowing and keeping your skin cool, your body doesn't register the heat of the sun. The cool wind entirely disguises the radiation.
So you don't feel yourself burning.
Not until you get back to your hotel room, take off your shirt, and realize you are the color of a boiled lobster.
It's the worst kind of sunburn, the one that totally sneaks up on you. Sibley's also issues another massive, frankly alarming warning about the tides.
Oh, the tides are serious.
They point out that tides completely dictate island life. If you decide to do one of those famous low-water walks between islands, because at low tide, sandbars appear connecting some of them, you absolutely must check the tide times.
The briefing bluntly quotes them, "Check the times, unless you want to swim back."
And they are not joking.
No, the tide rushes in over those sandbars with terrifying speed. People get cut off every single year.
This reliance on the natural elements brings us to the second major operational hazard in the brief. The weather controls your itinerary trap.
This is where the modern expectation of travel collides violently with oceanic reality.
And the mechanism of this trap is that travelers sit at home in London or New York, and they build these tight, hour-by-hour island-hopping itineraries.
And they assume the local boats run like city buses or subways.
Right. But the lived reality is that the ocean does not care about your spreadsheet. Tides, heavy swells, low cloud cover, and sea fog can completely disrupt and cancel both boats and flights at a moment's notice.
The brief explicitly quotes the St. Mary's Boatmen's Association, the guys who actually drive the boats. They state plainly that all their services vary daily due to tide, weather, and passenger numbers.
The example that really drove this home for me was the trips to the Bishop Rock Lighthouse and the Western Rocks to see the seals.
Those are hugely popular.
Right. But the audit notes that these specific, highly sought-after trips can be stopped by adverse weather for days at a time, not hours.
Yeah.
Days.
Exactly. So this raises a fundamental question about the value proposition of the Isles of Scilly.
Right. Because if the water's freezing, and a summer day can easily be totally fogged in, and your dream boat trip to see the puffins might be canceled for 3 days straight, why on earth are people paying such a massive premium to be here in August?
It is entirely driven by the scarcity mindset. In peak season, there is a very finite window of optimal weather and a highly finite number of beds on the islands.
They're hedging their bets.
Exactly. When people book a trip here, they know they are not buying a guarantee of sunshine. What they're paying for is the highest probability of sunshine, combined with maximum accessibility to all the island services being open at once.
They're buying the best possible odds in geographic casino.
Precisely. But the source provides a critical operational fix for this trap. If you are going, you must schedule your most weather-sensitive activities like that Bishop Rock boat trip on the very first day of your stay.
You have to build in a buffer.
Yes. If it gets canceled on Tuesday because of sea fog, you still have room in your itinerary to retry on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday.
That is such a smart travel hack. Front-load the risky stuff. Because if you save the best boat trip for your final day and it's windy, you just don't get to go.
You just miss out. The audit is incredibly firm on this. If you are the type of traveler who needs every pre-booked day to happen exactly as planned, you should skip the destination entirely. You have to surrender to the weather.
And honestly, you also have to surrender to the realities of the supply chain. Which leads us into the most fascinating part of this audit, this scarcity economy.
The economics of beds, bread, and island etiquette.
This was the section that made me realize I've been planning island vacations completely wrong my entire life.
It changes how you see it entirely.
The overarching booking rule for the Isles of Scilly in summer is that you must treat it like a scarce resource. It is not a normal UK seaside town where you can just drive down and find a motel.
The hierarchy of booking is rigid. The brief says you must book your accommodation first, transport is second, and your mainland positioning, like that hotel in Penzance we talked about, is third.
Which totally flips the normal script.
Yeah.
Usually people see a cheap flight or a ferry ticket, they buy it to lock in the dates, and then they figure out where they're going to sleep.
Which introduces the next major hazard, the accommodation scarcity trap. The mechanism here is a classic behavioral error.
Right. People feel a sense of urgency to lock in their ferry ticket because the ferry feels like the bottleneck.
Exactly. They book the transport first, they get their confirmation email, they feel great. And only then do they open up the hotel booking sites.
And they discover that accommodation is either completely sold out across all 5 islands or it is astronomically expensive.
And the briefing gives a terrifying real-world example of this. They pulled a sample from Expedia for a 2026 date at a mid-range property on St. Mary's called the Atlantic.
Let's hear the number.
The nightly rate was listed at $336, but once the taxes and fees were added, the total came to $403 per night.
$403 a night for a mid-range hotel.
Mid-range, not luxury.
Not a luxury resort.
Huh?
A mid-range hotel on an island where the water is too cold to swim in without a wetsuit.
That $403 illustrates exactly how quickly the concept of mid-range evaporates into premium pricing on Scilly. The actual number of beds on these islands is finite. You cannot just build a new high-rise hotel.
Because of the planning permissions, right?
Planning permissions, conservation rules, physical space, it is a strict, immovable bottleneck.
I was trying to think of how to describe this, and it really is like playing a high-stakes game of musical chairs.
Yes.
The music playing is the horn of the Scillonian ferry. If the music stops and you have booked your ferry ticket but you didn't secure a bed, you are literally sleeping on a windy stone quay.
Let's break down the accommodation tiers, the brief outline, so we understand what chairs we are actually fighting for here.
Okay, let's start at the budget end. If you want to keep costs down, you are essentially looking at campsites and very simple guest houses.
The brief specifically points to the Bryher campsite as a prominent option for 2026. The official Visit Isles of Scilly board heavily promotes camping and glamping.
But the audit warns that you should not expect mainland hostel prices just because you are in a tent.
No, not at all.
The brief sets a realistic summer camping or simple room budget at roughly $45 to $130 a night. That depends on your setup and the specific month.
But the trade-off for that lower price is incredibly steep. For $45 a night, you are facing intense weather exposure. If that Atlantic wind kicks up, you are feeling it.
You also have tricky luggage logistics, right? Getting your gear from the ferry to the campsite. And you have far fewer late-night food options if you are staying on an off-island like Bryher.
Exactly. Moving up to the mid-range tier, the advice is that couples visiting for the first time should really base themselves on St. Mary's.
Because Hughtown is the practical center of gravity.
Right. It gives you immediate walking access to the quay, the shops, the pubs, and the daily boat departures. Properties that fall into this category include the Atlantic, St. Mary's Hall Hotel, Tregarthen's Hotel, and Schooner's Hotel.
And as we saw with that Expedia example, that convenience and comfort will cost you heavily. The brief says you need to budget anywhere from $220 to $425 a night for a couple wanting a comfortable room in the warmer months.
And if you wait to book until the spring, expect to pay the absolute top end of that spectrum if you can even find a room at all.
Then we have to look at families. For families, space and certainty are paramount.
Cramming 4 people into a $400 a night hotel room usually just doesn't work.
No. So families turn to the self-catering market. Cottages, farm lodges, and weekly rental properties. The brief notes a critical structural issue here. This market behaves like a scarce weekly rental destination.
If you look at availability grids on local booking sites like Come to Scilly, they show week-based blocks. You generally cannot just pop in for 3 random days, like a Tuesday to a Thursday. You have to buy the whole week.
Which means the upfront commitment is massive. The cost for a family setup can easily run $300 to $650 a night in peak season.
Especially if the property sleeps 4 to 6 people and is within walking distance of Hughtown or a nice beach.
Now, you do save money on restaurant meals by utilizing the kitchen. But the pressure to book these properties incredibly early, often a full year in advance, is intense.
Finally, you have the luxury tier. This is for travelers who are actively deciding between the convenience of St. Mary's, the polished, curated environment of Tresco, the beach isolation of St. Martin's, or the rugged, smaller-scale feel of Bryher.
Properties like Karma St. Martin's or the high-end estate stays on Tresco. They cater to people who want the island itself to be the amenity. They aren't looking for excursions. The location is the experience.
But the brief points out a really interesting trade-off, even if you are spending top dollar at the luxury level.
What's that?
You are buying dependency. If you stay on a beautiful, isolated, off-island, you have fewer spontaneous options. You are much more sensitive to the weather if you want to leave the island for the day, and if a restaurant is closed or a boat plan changes, you have very little flexibility to just walk somewhere else.
Which perfectly transitions into the daily cost of living on the islands. We've established that beds are scarce, but that scarcity economy applies to food just as strictly.
Food prices here are shaped by a highly complex, fragile web. You have exorbitant freight costs, intense seasonality, massive staffing challenges, and virtually zero commercial competition.
The brief puts it perfectly. Expect prices closer to premium Cornwall dining than budget English seaside towns.
Let's actually look at the estimated food prices the audit provides, converted to US dollars, because this is where the daily budget really bleeds out.
Yeah, let's run the numbers. A simple takeaway coffee is $4 to $6. A bakery breakfast, maybe a pastry and a drink, is $5 to $10.
And if you sit down for a standard pub lunch, you are paying $18 to $30.
Wait, $30 for a pub lunch? Like a burger or a sandwich?
Yes. If you want classic fish and chips or casual seafood, that will run you $18 to $28. A proper dinner main course is $25 to $45.
A local beer or cider is $7 to $10 a pint. An ice cream on the beach is $4 to $7. And even if you think you can beat the system by self-catering, a basic dinner shop at the local grocery store will cost $35 to $75, depending on if you buy good protein or a bottle of wine.
Okay, I have to push back here, because when a listener hears $30 for a pub lunch, their immediate reaction is going to be, that is a tourist trap. They are price gouging because we are trapped on an island.
That is the natural reaction, but it is fundamentally incorrect. We need to dive into the microeconomics of this island supply chain to understand why that pub lunch costs $30.
It is not malicious price gouging.
Not at all. Think about the logistics. Every single ingredient on your plate, the flour in the bread, the beef in the burger, the cooking oil, the keg of beer you were drinking, has to be loaded onto a truck on the mainland, driven down the peninsula, loaded onto a freight ship, sailed across 28 miles of rough Atlantic Ocean, unloaded at St. Mary's, and then potentially loaded onto another smaller boat to reach an off-island like Bryher or St. Martin's.
And every time that box of tomatoes changes hands, someone has to be paid.
Exactly. And we already established that the boats are weather dependent. If the fog rolls in and the freight ship can't sail for 2 days, fresh produce spoils. The restaurant eats that cost.
But the biggest hidden cost baked into that $30 lunch is human capital.
The staff.
The staff. The person cooking your food and the person serving it need a place to sleep. We just discussed how scarce and expensive beds are. A restaurant owner on Scilly often has to secure and subsidize housing for their seasonal staff. Otherwise, no one can afford to work there.
So when you pay $30 for a lunch, you are paying for the boat fuel, the spoilage risk, and the waiter's rent.
That is a fascinating way to look at it. The structural cost is literally baked into every pint of beer and every plate of chips.
And navigating these costs requires dodging what the brief calls the local currency illusion.
Ah, this is a psychological trap that catches international visitors, especially Americans.
The brief uses the example of a local wildlife boat fare. It's published on the chalkboard at the quay as £21 for an adult.
Now, to a British traveler or someone just glancing at the number, £21 might sound like a relatively small, reasonable local price for an hour on a boat.
It feels like a $20 bill.
Exactly. But when you apply the exchange rate, £21 is actually roughly $29 USD.
And the illusion is that these small local prices stack up with terrifying speed. If you are a family of 4 and you all decide on a whim to take that £21 boat trip, you haven't just spent a little pocket money. You have suddenly dropped nearly $120 USD just for a short 90-minute afternoon activity.
If you do that every day, plus the $30 pub lunches, the budget evaporates.
Which means you cannot be spontaneous with your wallet. And honestly, you can't be spontaneous with your schedule either.
The brief outlines a specific mindset required here, which they label island etiquette. It's essentially a survival guide for not infuriating the locals and not going hungry.
First rule, you have to book your restaurants in advance. You cannot just wander around at 7:30 p.m. expecting to find a table for 4.
Second rule, you have to be on time for boats. The boatmen are operating on tidal schedules, not your holiday whims.
Third rule, manage your meal times. If you miss the lunch service window, usually 12:00 p.m. to 2:00 p.m. on an off-island like St. Agnes or Tresco. It is not like missing lunch in London, where you just walk next door to a Pret, a Manger, or a corner cafe.
The kitchen closes, the staff goes on break. You will simply not eat a hot meal until dinner.
And if you are self-catering, the etiquette is even stricter. The brief warns visitors to shop early in the day. You cannot walk into a small island store 5 minutes before closing time and strip the shelves of all the bread, milk, and eggs.
The locals rely on that inventory, too.
You also need to communicate dietary requirements well in advance. Do not sit down at a tiny six-table restaurant on Bryher and suddenly announce you need a complex, gluten-free, dairy-free, vegan substitution. They simply do not have the mainland inventory in the back to improvise on the spot.
The audit is uncompromising on this final point. Do not assume that island staff can absorb mainland impatience, and do not complain that a small island is not operating like a major city.
You have to plan, you have to be polite, and you have to accept the pace.
Okay, so we understand the scarcity, we understand the incredible logistics of the supply chain, and we understand the etiquette. But what does this actually look like when we tally it all up?
The audit provides highly specific daily budget estimates across different traveler profiles, and we need to walk through them.
It's vital to note before we look at these numbers, these daily estimates completely exclude the initial mainland to island transport. This is just what you are burning through every single day once you step off the ferry or the plane.
Let's start with the backpacker profile. The brief estimates $120 to $210 per day.
To achieve this, your accommodation is $45 to $130, meaning you are pitching a tent or finding a very basic room in the shoulder season.
Your food budget is strictly limited to $35 to $60 a day. That means bakery breakfasts, assembling your own picnic lunches from the grocery store, and maybe allowing yourself one modest pub meal.
Your inter-island transport is kept to $0 to $30, meaning you are mostly walking, not island hopping every day.
And your attraction budget is $0 to $30, relying heavily on the free natural landscape, the beaches, the coastal paths, and maybe paying for one garden entry or one boat trip the entire stay.
But the most critical element of this budget is what the brief calls the buffer.
Yes, the buffer. It insists on a daily buffer of $15 to $25 for the backpacker. What is that for?
It is for the friction of island life. You might need to pay for luggage transfers because you can't carry everything in the rain. A sudden weather change might force you out of your tent and into a cafe where you have to buy a coffee just to stay dry.
Or food costs might just be higher than you anticipated.
This $120 to $210 budget only works if you fully accept the physical discomfort of camping and weather exposure.
Moving up to the mid-range traveler, the daily cost per person jumps significantly to $230 to $425.
Your share of a comfortable room is about $110 to $215 a night.
Your food budget expands to $65 to $110, which covers 3 decent meals a day, plus coffees, maybe a drink in the evening.
Local transport is $25 to $70, allowing you to take inter-island boats freely or grab an occasional taxi on St. Mary's.
Attractions for the mid-range traveler run $15 to $60, covering tickets to Tresco Abbey Garden, guided walking tours, or wildlife cruises.
The required buffer here is $15 to $40. So before you even factor in the cost of getting from Cornwall to the islands, the audit states that the comfortable, stress-free number for a mid-range traveler is around $320 per person per day.
Which means a couple is dropping over $600 a day just to exist comfortably on the island. But it gets so much heavier when we hit the family budget.
For 2 adults and 2 children traveling in peak season, you are looking at an eye-watering $650 to $1,250 a day.
Accommodation is a massive chunk of that, $300 to $650 for a family-size rental. Food is $170 to $300, and that's assuming you're actively mixing self-catering with occasional meals out.
And the transport costs multiply brutally for families. Just moving 4 people around on inter-island boats will cost $60 to $160 a day.
Attractions add another $40 to $160. But look at the buffer the brief recommends for families, an astonishing $80 to $180 a day.
Why is the family buffer so huge? Are kids just inherently expensive?
Yes, but it's specifically about buying convenience when the environment turns hostile. When the weather shifts and it starts pouring rain, or when children get physically exhausted from walking miles on coastal paths, parents pay heavily to solve the problem.
They seek immediate cover in cafes and buy hot chocolates and cakes they didn't plan for.
They take expensive taxis instead of forcing the kids to walk back to the rental. The buffer is the price of keeping the peace.
So I have to ask the obvious question. Are families just getting completely ripped off here? Or is this massive daily spend the actual price of admission for this kind of environment?
The brief specifically calls out something called the family trap.
The family trap is a cognitive bias. It's the assumption that because the primary attraction, the beach, is free, the overall trip will be cheap.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. We'll just play in the sand all day. It won't cost a dime.
Exactly. The sand is free, the water is free. But the beds required to sleep near that beach, the boats required to reach that beach, the meals required to feed the family after a day on that beach, and the flexibility to escape the rain when the beach becomes miserable, those are not free.
Those are premium commodities. Let's unpack this concept of the high costs further, because the expert analysis in the brief argues that these prices are not a scam. In fact, they serve a vital structural purpose.
They do. The high costs are the actual price of maintaining a low-capacity, high-preservation environment.
Think about it. If the Isles of Scilly were cheap, if hotels were $80 a night, and the ferry was $10, the demand would instantly, violently overwhelm the infrastructure.
The sewage systems would fail, the small roads would be gridlocked, the beaches would be trashed, and the very charm people go to experience would be destroyed.
The high price tag inherently protects the islands by throttling capacity. It is an economic barrier that preserves the ecology.
The price is the shield that completely reframes the sticker shock.
Now, if money is truly no object and you want to bypass the friction entirely, we have the luxury daily budget, $850 to $1,800 per couple.
This is for high-end accommodation, perhaps staying at the premier properties on Tresco, which will cost $450 to over $1,000 a night just for the room.
Food is $180 to $350, assuming fine dining and good wine.
And if you opt for the helicopter arrivals, private boat charters, spa treatments, and premium dining experiences, you can easily add another $150 to $400 a day in incidentals.
The buffer here is $70 to $150. But the brief makes a very sharp value judgment about the luxury tier.
Right. It says luxury value here is high if the specific product you are buying is isolation, private gardens, empty beaches, and absolute quiet.
The value is incredibly weak if your definition of luxury is guaranteed sunshine, massive resort infrastructure, swim-up bars, and a concierge who can magically make the rain stop.
You cannot buy your way out of the maritime climate.
Finally, we have the digital nomad or long-stay budget. Post-pandemic, everyone wants to work from a beautiful island.
The brief estimates a month-long stay will cost $4,000 to $8,500, but it warns that accommodation is the ultimate blocker here, not the price of the daily coffee.
Attempting a month-long stay in summer is almost entirely unrealistic unless you book a year in advance, have deep local contacts, or are willing to make massive compromises by traveling in the dead of winter.
The breakdown for a month is stark. Food is $900 to $1,600. Transport and boats are $250 to $700.
Workspace and connectivity backup, because island Wi-Fi can be notoriously unstable, is $100 to $300. Leisure is $300 to $900.
And you need a massive structural buffer of $500 to $1,000 just for systemic failures.
The conclusion is brutal. Scilly is a terrible destination for conventional digital nomads looking for a cheap, sunny base to code from. It's only viable for successful writers on a short retreat or remote workers who can simply afford to pay a massive premium for isolation.
And while we are talking about specific costs, we really should list the exact prices for those inter-island experiences that stack up so fast, just so listeners have the raw data.
Based on the St. Mary's Boatmen's Association 2026 published fares, converted to USD, a standard direct return boat to an off-island is about $21 for an adult and $10 for a child.
If you want to do the specialized wildlife trips, that's about $29 for an adult.
And if you want to go all the way out to the Bishop Rock Lighthouse or do the specific seabird tracking trips, that pushes up to $32 for an adult.
And then there's the signature attraction of the entire archipelago, the Tresco Abbey Garden.
It is open from mid-March to late October, between 10:00 a.m. and 4:00 p.m.
The entry fees are roughly $25 for an adult, $23 for seniors over 65, $7 for a child, and $55 for a family ticket.
Knowing those exact numbers is so crucial because, as the brief points out, these are inescapable toll gates. You cannot experience the best parts of the Isles of Scilly without paying them.
You can't just hike to Tresco. You have to pay the boatman, and then you have to pay the garden entry.
Which brings us perfectly to the next phase of the audit. Expectations versus reality. The highlights, the lowlights, and the alternatives.
Let's start with the highlights, because when the islands deliver, they deliver an experience that is unmatched anywhere else in Northern Europe.
You just mentioned Tresco Abbey Garden. The official Tresco documentation notes that this garden contains more than 2,000 exotic species from the southern hemisphere and subtropical regions.
How is that even possible off the coast of England?
It's because of the Gulf Stream and the unique microclimate of the islands. The brief says the garden works precisely because it provides an intense, visually stunning contrast.
It is fundamentally unlike any normal British garden. You are walking past towering palms and exotic blooms while listening to the Atlantic crash against the rocks outside the walls.
Then you have the beaches on St. Martin's. The audit notes these work wonderfully if you get the right weather for the boat crossing, and crucially, if you aren't expecting a commercialized beach club scene.
There are no cabanas or waitstaff bringing you cocktails on the sand. It is pure, raw beauty.
Bryher is highlighted as ideal for walkers who want rugged edges, exposure to the weather, and a true small island scale.
St. Agnes is perfect for travelers wanting that remote, end-of-the-line feeling. It's the most southwesterly community in the UK.
And St. Mary's works perfectly as a hub for first-timers. While it might lack the extreme isolation of the off-islands, Hugh provides the necessary access to food, the medical center, the quay, and the boat logistics that keep a trip running smoothly.
And those wildlife trips we priced out, especially the ones to the Eastern Isles to see the gray seals or the Bishop Rock routes, can be genuinely world-class.
But, and this is the massive but that the audit revolves around the boatmen, explicitly state that these operations are entirely shaped by weather and tides.
Which leads us to the honest disappointments. This is where the visual expectations clash violently with the physical reality.
The first major disappointment is the water. We keep coming back to it, but it's essential.
The water may look like the Caribbean, but it feels absolutely freezing.
It is the North Atlantic. Unless you are accustomed to wild swimming, you're going to need a wetsuit to stay in for more than a few minutes.
The second disappointment is the crowding. The pictures on Instagram show vast, empty stretches of white sand.
But the reality is that in August, the hotels on the island are at 100% capacity. You are sharing that small island with thousands of other people who all want the exact same empty beach photo.
Furthermore, day trips can feel intensely rushed. Because the ferry schedule strictly controls the clock, you often find yourself constantly checking your watch rather than relaxing.
The famous Scillonian crossing, as we discussed, can be memorable entirely for the wrong reasons if severe seasickness hits.
St. Mary's can feel busier and more congested with traffic than expected around the quay.
And Tresco, while undeniably beautiful, can feel highly polished, manicured, and expensive, rather than genuinely wild and unpainted.
So, if you are listening to all this and thinking, you know what, paying $1,000 a day to freeze in the North Atlantic and get seasick maybe isn't for me, the brief actually offers two excellent alternatives that scratch a similar itch but with different variables.
Alternative one is Jersey in the Channel Islands.
Jersey is presented as the far better option for families who need reliability. It still offers beautiful island scenery, history, and beaches.
But it has massive advantages in infrastructure. It has a much deeper dining scene, a vast array of accommodation choices from budget to luxury, and vastly easier flight logistics from multiple major airports.
And crucially for families, Jersey has actual supermarkets, public buses, indoor rainy day entertainment options, and immediate large-scale medical access.
It's often cheaper for mid-range travelers simply because the accommodation base is larger, which creates competition and drives prices down.
The trade-off, however, is that you lose the tiny island novelty. Jersey has traffic and commuters. Scilly still wins hands down for low-traffic walking and the romantic feeling of being somewhere intimately small.
Alternative 2 is the Outer Hebrides in Scotland. You choose this if you want massive, dramatic landscapes, absolute road trip freedom, and vast amounts of physical space.
For travelers who are willing to take their own car on the ferry and utilize self-catering accommodation, the audit estimates that daily spending in the Hebrides can be $75 to $180 lower per day than on Scilly.
But ferry planning remains absolutely vital up in Scotland, too. The weather up there can be even more severe.
The Outer Hebrides is better for road trippers and photographers seeking scale, whereas Scilly is better for gentler pedestrian walking distances and people who completely refuse to drive a car once they arrive on holiday.
I think we need an analogy to really solidify how these three destinations compare.
If we think of these places as vehicles, Jersey is your sensible, reliable family minivan. It holds everything you need, it has a backup camera, the AC works perfectly, and it performs flawlessly in the rain. It might not be the most exciting vehicle, but it never lets you down.
The Outer Hebrides is a rugged diesel 4x4. It is built for scale, endurance, and taking a beating from the elements. You can throw all your gear in the back and conquer the landscape.
And the Isles of Scilly. The Isles of Scilly is a vintage, beautifully restored convertible.
That is the perfect framing.
Yeah.
It's absolutely gorgeous, deeply romantic, and turning heads wherever it goes.
But it is highly susceptible to the elements. If it rains, the roof leaks, and you're getting wet. And it requires a tremendous amount of expensive, specialized maintenance to keep it running.
As a traveler, you have to align your emotional needs with your travel budget and the vehicle you are choosing. If you need guaranteed sunshine, or if you are someone who gets visibly angry when plans change at the last minute because of a mechanical issue or a rainstorm, Scilly will feel like a massive, stressful ripoff. You should buy the minivan.
Which brings us to the grand finale of the audit, the ultimate is it worth it matrix. The brief assigns scores out of 10 for different traveler profiles based on the value proposition. Let's synthesize these verdicts.
I love this. I will give you the traveler profile, and I want you to give us the final verdict, the so what, and the key financial number they need to burn into their brain before booking. Let's start with the backpacker.
For the backpacker, the brief scores it a 4 out of 10 in peak season and a 6 out of 10 in the off-season, provided they are camping.
The verdict.
It is worth it only if you can tolerate camping in variable weather, travel outside of peak school holidays, commit to walking everywhere, self-cater all your meals, and totally accept weather disruption without complaint. You must skip this destination if you need cheap hostel beds or inexpensive pub nightlife.
The key financial number. Expect to spend $120 to $210 a day on the ground before you even factor in the main access journey.
Next, the midrange traveler or couple.
They get a 7 out of 10, but with a massive asterisk. Book carefully.
It is worth it if you prioritize coastal walking, botanical gardens, wildlife watching, and quiet evenings rather than active nightlife. You must skip it if you expect Mediterranean warmth, cheap wine, or guaranteed boat days.
The key financial number. A couple will easily burn through $450 to $850 a day. Again, just existing on the islands.
What about the family?
Families get a 6 out of 10. The audit calls it high reward but high risk.
It is worth it if your kids genuinely enjoy nature, boats, walking, and low-key days, and critically, if you manage to book a self-catering property a year in advance. Skip it entirely if you or your children need theme park entertainment, warm swimming water, or weatherproof indoor attractions.
The key financial number. $650 to $1,250 per day for a peak season trip is the realistic floor once accommodation, food, and necessary boat trips are tallied.
The luxury traveler.
They score an 8 out of 10 if isolation is the specific product they are buying, but they score a 5 out of 10 if luxury to them means massive resort infrastructure.
It is worth it for high-end aesthetic comfort, private-feeling beaches, and slow, considered dining. Skip it if you demand seamless international-style service, hot tropical evenings, and massive spa depth.
The key financial number. Spending $850 to $1,800 a day per couple makes sense here only if absolute quiet is your primary goal.
And finally, the digital nomad or solo traveler.
The brief gives nomads a 5 out of 10, but solo walkers an 8 out of 10.
It is worth it for a creative retreat, focused bird watching, and low social noise. Skip it if you need cheap monthly rent, vibrant co-working spaces, and an evening social scene.
The key financial number. At $4,000 to $8,500 a month, this functions as an expensive retreat destination, not a value-based nomad hub.
The overall verdict from the entire audit is crystal clear. Book with your eyes wide open. Understand the friction. Or if the ferry experience genuinely worries you, just wait for the transition to finish in 2027 when the new Scillonian IV vessel arrives.
The Isles of Scilly are undeniably worth it for walkers, garden lovers, wildlife watchers, quiet couples, and well-funded families who can comfortably pay the premium for scarce accommodation.
But the hard truth is that they are explicitly not worth it for bargain hunters, sun chasers, nightlife travelers, or anyone inflexible to sudden weather changes.
The absolute no-fluff takeaway from this entire deep dive is that Scilly is beautiful, but it exists in a costly, weather-dependent, capacity-limited reality.
You are intentionally paying a massive premium for isolation and friction. You either pay for that knowingly and happily, or you choose somewhere easier.
And that reality brings up a really fascinating, much larger question that we should mull over as we wrap this up. If the entire appeal and the justification for the high cost of these islands is based on this incredibly delicate balance of low capacity and unpredictable maritime weather, what happens in the future?
It raises a profound, almost troubling point about the future of travel.
As climate change potentially makes maritime weather even more severe and unpredictable, with stronger Atlantic storms and thicker, more persistent sea fogs disrupting those ferries and small planes, will delicate, low-capacity destinations like the Isles of Scilly eventually become totally inaccessible to the average traveler?
Could we see a near future where the only reliable access is flying in by private or chartered helicopter, essentially turning a beloved domestic treasure into an exclusive, high-friction fortress accessible only to the ultra-wealthy?
It is an incredibly provocative thought, and something every traveler needs to seriously consider when looking at how fragile these microeconomies are. Because at the end of the day, when you see those photos of the pristine white sand and the crystal clear water on your feed, you have to remember that beauty is absolutely real, but the environment it exists in is complex, expensive, and entirely at the mercy of the elements.
If you're planning a trip and want the honest, is it worth it verdict before you book, follow the show on Spotify or Apple.
If this gave you the honest verdict you needed, follow the show. New episodes drop every day.
That is the honest verdict from Phil and H.